We see things every day, especially in a hospital, that are traumatic to witness, and they're grief and death and human suffering. And in order to continue to do that really hard work, no matter your profession, there has to be a way for you to process that. And so many times it's people just kind of put on layers of armor that lead to that perceived, coldness, hurriedness, and kind of dissociate from the moment at hand. But I think that we're also missing out on some of our most gifted healing properties as a person when we're doing that, because we're still a human being delivering care to another human being. And when the patient doesn't feel that humanity, it's obvious. And it feels like they don't care, the provider. And as the provider, I think part of our jobs as any profession in the hospital is unraveling all we can so that we can be present to someone in our own humanity.
And welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness by Inspire. It's Luciano here speaking as your host. Before we get into our next conversation here with Sue, I want to remind the listener, please subscribe if you haven't already done so. Please share with family and friends, and please feel free to donate if you're inclined. We are a not-for-profit and a charity. Most of our listeners already know this. But I'd like to remind at the beginning of every session that we have, we all give our time here, and we also issue tax receipts as a charity. So that's an added bonus. So you just go to our website, behindgreatness.org. You can find everything there, as well as the library of conversations that we've been having the last almost 3 years now, which continue to astound us, not understanding that we could actually have this done 3 years ago. But intent on having it done, which is weird and fun. So we're going to have a little bit of weird and a little bit of fun today too, I think. We have Sue Ludwig today. Sue joins us from Cincinnati. She is the media expert in neonatal therapy for the American Occupational Therapy Association and a member of the steering committee for National Coalition for Infant Health and a medical advisory board member for HOPE for HIE. Well, I didn't ask you about HIE. She is a sought-after speaker, consultant, and writer. She's a licensed occupational therapist, certified neonatal therapist, and the president and founder of NANT, National Association of Neonatal Therapists. She also has a book that she came out with almost to the day, right? 1 year ago, entitled Tiny Humans, Big Lessons. So obviously published in March 2022. And you can see some of her work and her bio and other content at SueLudwig.com. Sue, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Sue, actually, what I want to do before I ask you about babies, I want to thank Jill Bolt Taylor, and she's a friend of yours, has been on our podcast. She's got a very viral TED Talk, and she was on, I think last year, it was about a year ago. And she recommended that we connect with you. So I thank her for it. Before we talk about babies, I just want to tell you, I don't know if you know about this guy. His name is Z Frank. You ever heard of him?
Sounds familiar, but I can't come up with a single thought about it.
It's okay. I didn't expect you to know. I just came across him probably a few weeks ago, and he does he has a YouTube channel. His YouTube channel is called True Facts, and he does animal videos. And they're very educational, extremely witty, and he's very funny. And he's got millions and millions of followers. I had no idea that this existed, but he pronounces babies, babies. That's what he says. So I know we're going to talk about babies, but the last few weeks, that word has been pronounced a different way in my head.
Well, that's fun. I'm going to keep that pronunciation in my head too.
Babies. So if I do pronounce it that way, I'm just having fun with it. That's please don't take offense. So why do you love babies?
So many reasons. I love babies and working with babies because, well, there's, the natural innocence of babies, which is endearing to me. But also from my medical perspective, they're just largely unexplored. I think we know the tip of the iceberg about them. And I'm fascinated that most of what we can know is derived from learning through their behaviors. They can't speak to us in language. They do communicate, but not in words like we do. And so it's fascinating to me to try to engage and interact with this little being who is relying on us for a lot of the interpretation of their communication. They're pretty fascinating little people.
I would agree with you. One of the interests I had in speaking to you, I didn't tell, well, maybe I don't know if I told you. I'm sorry, I'm having an internal conversation here live. My first boy was a preemie. So he was born 5 weeks premature. So he was a big preemie. He was like 5 pounds, 5 and change. So it's pretty big as a preemie, but still very small. Couldn't feed himself and couldn't make any sounds other than like a small squeak. It was a scary experience for the first 2 days because he had to be in a box.
Yes.
And it was, I couldn't even explain what my wife was going through because she was a first-time mother. As a first-time dad, I was angry that he was kept in a box. I understood perhaps the reasons why that he was, but I was even angrier about something else. So this one I know I didn't share with you.
Okay.
So bear with me because there's a question in here and I want to get your perspective. So my older boy was born during SARS. So 2003 in Toronto. And so all hospitals closed off to any guests, nice, like a hotel, any non-patients or direct relatives like parents. Mm-hmm. So we were alone in the hospital. And after the second day, so he was in the neonatal intensive care. So in this box for 2 days, he was transferred to another hospital that had a specialized ward for neonatals. We were hit that morning. We were hit with a power outage in the city of Toronto. So everything came to a grounding. We didn't know we were in a hospital. When we came out, we saw this traffic and like smack in the middle of the day. Well, what is this? So it took us about 3 hours to do, 4 miles. It was, wow. Anyway, so my wife was not allowed to go into the ambulance with the baby. And her nurse told her she wasn't allowed. So of course, first-time mother, my wife lost her marbles. Says, no, you're not separating me from my baby. There's no way. So she got herself on that ambulance before the nurse could climb on. So she sweet-talked the driver and whoever was there. And she was in this ambulance and the nurse for the 3 hours didn't look at her in the face. She was so upset. Of course, I knew the story later on. After the 3 hours that I tailed this ambulance, the nurse was upset that the new mother could not be in the ambulance with her baby, who was still in a box, for the whole 3 hours. Then we had a completely opposite, a very good experience afterwards. The reason why I shared this long story, I'm really sorry because I want you to speak now. You have in your book, so I went through your book, and you have a 5-second rule, or 5-second rule, and there are 5 things, 5 steps. One of them was touch. Our baby couldn't be touched by us because he was in this box. And it was terrifying. It was terrifying for us. We never thought that it'd be terrifying for the baby. Here's a question to you. One of probably many I'm going to ask. How do you know when a baby that small, who can't communicate, can't even scream or cry because they're too young to do it, how do you know that they're terrified or traumatized?
So the tricky thing about babies is, we can't ask them, and they don't always show really overt signs of being scared or anxious, but they do show us some signs. So they may have like an increase in their heart rate. They may kind of flail about frantically if they have the energy to do that. They may lose all of their muscle tone, where all of a sudden they look kind of flaccid and just like they've lost all their muscle tone. They may widen their eyes really big, and they may become unstable even in their heart rate and blood pressure. Those are things we can see in the immediate situation. But then there are longer term studies where we know that separation and can be traumatizing for the baby and the mother because they are supposed to be together. And I don't know it down to the minutes, seconds, hours being separated, but there is a huge push in the neonatal community for as little separation as possible, even when a baby is fairly unstable at birth.
Oh, that's comforting to know.
Yes.
If I ever have grandkids, then I'll keep that comment in mind. What happened? You guys are progressing.
Yes.
Why have we? I'm going to. So my question here has an assumption imputed. Why do you think, if we have we lost connection with how babies work, babies communicate?
I think some of it's to do with sort of the Western medicine approach to care, as far as in the hospital anyway. Mm-hmm. I think that, for millions of years, humans were not separated, and that mothers and babies being together was part of the baby's survival. And we, in a hospital setting, there's sort of a culture where we think, we're going to take any patient, but especially a fragile baby, and we're going to bring them over here and we're going to do what we need to do to resuscitate them or to care for them. And then families were sort of seen as like visitors for quite a few decades. And so even, their tag is visiting hours. It's all in the culture and in the policies and everything, how it's woven into our hospital culture, at least in America. And so, there was this sense of this is a medical situation. And I think we lost sense of, while yes, there is a medical situation happening, it's happening in the midst of a crucial developmental situation. And so for so long, the medical situation and survival were prioritized, and should be. No parent would not want to prioritize survival, I think. So, but we do know that babies are actually more stable when they're laying on their mother's chest, skin to skin, than they even are in the box you were talking about in the incubator. So one of the neonatologists, I was actually at a conference last week, and I've heard her speak before, said, if we're really practicing evidence-based medicine, that the baby would be on the mother's chest more than in the incubator because it is the more stable environment. But that in a medical world seems like soft medicine in some ways.
Soft.
It's how could that be so powerful when it just is biologically present instead of something that we intervene and do and manage and all of that. So
there's lots in there. So you said the word soft, obviously in quotations, right? Because it's something, a few things are implied in there. So let's get at that, if you don't mind, for a few minutes or hours, depending on how much time. So you said in 2003 you started to train other staff members on a better quality of life. I'm just going over my notes. Up until that point, you realized that the concern was about survival, but not just quality of life, and you wanted to push that agenda forward in the training of staff. And then in 2009, you founded NANT. So we said at the beginning, so NANT, National Association of Neonatal Therapists. Why did you do that? Why did you feel the need to start this?
I felt the need to start NANT because I'm an occupational therapist, and then NANT is also for physical and speech therapists, and who specialize in the NICU. And therapists have been working in the NICU for decades.
So NICU for listeners who don't know what it is, what does it stand for?
Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. Okay. So both premature babies and sick full-term babies go to the NICU, both. So not just premature, but also full-term babies who have other complications as well. And so I started the organization because while we had been working there for decades, there wasn't a group of us. We couldn't talk to each other. There were no national standards that were widely accepted about what we should be doing in there, what we should know in order to work there. And so I wanted to standardize and raise the bar for what therapists like me knew and were taught, and how we were trained to work in that very specialized environment. So I shopped my idea, honestly, for quite a while. I did not see myself as a leader or the leader of this. I just thought it should happen. Somebody should go do this. But eventually, I did found the organization. I felt like babies and families deserved more from us. And we knew a lot about neonatal development and how to improve it and improve that quality of life. But I knew that we could be much more powerful if we were together, and if we were looking at the same research and the same practices and standardizing them and improving them across the United States and now across the world.
Some people might shrug, and including the old me for decades, shrug at this kind of conversation. Well, I mean, they're babies. Babies are cute. They're lovely. Mothers will always take care of them. Yeah, okay, there might be some problems, but they get fed and they make people happy. Like, who cares? Babies scream and cry all the time. Big deal. They'll get over it. They'll grow up and then forget it. Like, babies eventually grow up and forget. Or do they? Question to you.
Yeah, I think we make a mistake in thinking that everything is remembered only in our sort of cognitive memory, but our bodies remember things. And babies' brain, the wiring that is happening in their early brain development, and this is true for all of us, but in those early years, and especially a premature baby whose brain isn't even full term yet, part of our brain is wired by genetics and part of it is by experience. And so the experiences that we have, especially if they're repetitive, and especially in critical periods of development, like in this preterm infant, make lasting impressions. And they're part of how the literal structure of your brain is set down for life. And so, yes, the brain development remains malleable throughout a lot of our life, but it is formed and is instructed by our experiences. And so, for example, a preterm baby may not remember, like have a visual or known memory in their head when they're 6 years old of having multiple, like they get their heels stuck to get blood out of them. And so if you're a baby that's in the hospital a long time and you have many, 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 many heel sticks, we know that those babies can be really aversive to having anything touch their feet, anyone, socks, shoes, grass, sand, anything. And so does that child remember that like a memory? I don't think so. But will their body recoil in an exaggerated way in that part of their body? Yes. And so, our bodies are taking notes. Our sensory systems are informing our brain development for life. So in that way, they remember. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So let's go on the other side here. Going back to your earlier use of soft. So there's a passage in your book, and it reminded me of a couple of things. One is I want to be kind here because I'm not trying to slight anybody or any one profession, but the often coldness that you get from medical professionals in a hospital setting who are obviously busy, who are obviously stretched, who are obviously stressed. So let's go back to the word soft. Okay. Yes. Language. It's about language. So this is you now. I'm reading here a quick passage. In the hospital, we may use language like the 29 weaker in bed. The 29 weaker in bed 6, or refer to a patient assignment as 2 vents and a feeder grower. The same thing happens in adult land medicine, the head injury, quote unquote, the stroke, quote unquote, the overdose, quote unquote. This likely springs from the medical focus on diagnoses and well, it's convenient when names always change, but diagnoses don't. It's also a way to disassociate from the collective suffering we see on a daily basis. I'm assuming that this disassociation is not a good thing.
Yes, I think I would say it's not a good thing, but I think it's a pretty typical thing. And it's a hard thing to prevent or to unravel once you've been in the healthcare system for a long time. We see things every day, especially in a hospital, that are traumatic to witness, and their grief and death and human suffering.
Mm.
And in order to continue to do that really hard work, no matter your profession, there has to be a way for you to process that. And so many times it's people just kind of put on layers of armor that lead to that perceived, coldness, hurriedness, and kind of dissociate from the moment at hand. But I think that we're also missing out on some of our most gifted healing properties as a person when we're doing that, because we're still a human being delivering care to another human being. And when the patient doesn't feel that humanity, it's obvious. And it feels like they don't care, the provider. And as the provider, I think part of our jobs as any profession in the hospital is unraveling all we can so that we can be present to someone in our own humanity.
Here's a tack on. Everybody I know has stories, or at least one story, of nurse and doctors being empathetic to their plight while in a hospital state, and the opposite, unsympathetic, unapathetic, or apathetic. And the I know that when you're in a hospital and you have a family member that's sick, or you're in the bed sick yourself, and you are being attended to by a doctor or a nurse that doesn't show any empathy, it actually feels like you're in a jail. I mean, that a little bit of bedside manners goes a very long way to a positive reaction to being there. Like, you feel like you're being cared for instead of being surveilled.
Yes, which is like Jill Bolte Taylor's whole book. Her first book is so instructive to me that way. Yeah.
And going to her, what did you learn from her? Because you said there was a lesson that you got from your interactions with her.
Yeah, from her, I remembered the biggest influence from that book and from meeting her was just the concept of, please take responsibility for the energy you bring into this space. And that phrase just made me stop in my tracks. And she explains it so well in her situation as when she was a patient in the hospital. But in trying to weave that concept into my own life, it's quite challenging.
Sure.
But it was really intriguing to try to think, oh, I actually can be responsible for how I show up and what I'm bringing, not only in the hospital, in my patients, but into my whole life. It's a changer for me.
I never really thought of it that way until I actually spoke with her on this too, about the energy you bring. Like, everybody's conscious of the way they feel usually when they enter a room, but to be really present in there with what you're bringing to other people, that's it's not that difficult, but it is next level.
I agree.
So on that, can I read your 5-second rule? Like, just a quick summary. Do you mind? Okay.
Sure.
So there are 5 things that you mentioned that you should do. It's obviously, please fill in the blanks there, because this is your book. And each of these things are done within a consecutive seconds. So 5 seconds. One of them really speaks to me, and I want to discuss that one too. So second 1, pause and breathe. Second 2, check your baggage. Second 3, address the baby by name. So you don't have to say baby, like, because your book is about life lessons, human lessons, not just baby lessons, which is what I appreciate too. But you can fill in the blank baby with anybody else. Second 4, provide human touch. And second 5, set your intention. Of those 5, the most difficult one for me ever, and almost always, is check your baggage, second 2. Because I bring my damn baggage everywhere I go. And that's me not as a medical professional. So I can understand, like, you're stressed and you're going to an overly stressed institution as a nurse or a doctor, medical professional, occupational therapist. Like, your whole day can be a disaster if you don't check your baggage.
Yes.
So let me ask it through an example. Ask my question through an example.
Yes.
The example I can give you about the difficulty in checking baggage. It's always like on the podcast, we were talking about going with the flow. And I love doing business in Mexico. So we work with Mexico retailers in the food business and so forth. And I like the energy down there because people don't regard time there like they do in Canada or US. They're less rigid on it. But if they see that you go with the flow, there's an appreciation, right? So you kind of swim together, right? You go back and forth. Sometimes they'll go deeper, more shallow, go another way, and you're just waiting, or maybe you just paddle over. Whatever, I'm using a stupid metaphor. But so, for instance, if one of my sons needs to be driven somewhere, and it's smack in the middle of a time where I really need to work and do something, I'll always help. I will always help. I always have their back. I always tell them I have their back, but sometimes I'm an ass about it. We'll be in the car and I still can't get my mind off the fact that I really need to be at my desk right now. I really need to make that video call right now. And here I am, because this guy's a responsibility. I'm bringing him to wherever, right? And sometimes I can't get myself out of my head that way. But children and babies teach you. Yes. Is whether you want to listen or not. Sorry, I know there's a long question. It excites me. That's why I have. How do you check your baggage?
In the hospital, it was easier, actually. So I'll start there and then go into life. But in the hospital, before I would see a patient and I would go through this 5-second rule, it was easier only in that the entrance into and out of that moment was very clear. As starting a patient session, maybe I'm putting gloves on, but I'm for sure washing my hands. Like, there are very clear cues, like I'm entering a space and then I'm leaving the space. So I also only had to check my baggage for a very specific amount of time and for a really fragile person. So the gravity of it made me, sort of have the perspective in order to set it aside. What helped me is, one, to look at it like literal luggage. So if I had something like that on my mind that was sort of making me frustrated or angry or sad or anything, and I defined checking the baggage as what doesn't belong in the moment I'm in right now. So what energy doesn't belong to this person? So if you're in the car with your son, what belongs in that moment? What is not? What's extraneous to that moment? And for the babies, I knew that whatever I was feeling might translate into my hands and into the way I moved them and the way I interacted with them. So I would picture it like luggage that I was like dragging to the bedside with me, because the visual helped me think, what am I dragging around right now? And then I would visualize checking it, like leaving it outside the space. And I could know that if I felt somehow satisfied or attached to it, I could come right back to it when I was finished with that moment, but I needed to set it outside of the space. That was harder in everyday life because, to your point, there's like a million things going on that aren't as clearly defined as the beginning and the end of a patient session. But in that world, I would use kind of still those physical transitions. Like if you were getting in the car with your son, like that's a physical transition. You're going from your office, you're leaving that space. And I would sort of think, where's the next space I'm going? And what kind of energy do I want to bring into that space? And then see that any baggage or, unwanted stuff that I was literally dragging like luggage into there with me, whether it's like, I don't have time to do this right now. I can't believe I said I would do this, all the, whatever that is. Someday they're going to leave and I know I'm doing this, but it doesn't make it any easier right now. All the things we do as parents. But I just picture that, and like, I would leave it outside the car and just think, I can leave it on the sidewalk, in the driveway, whatever.
You wouldn't even bring it in, at least leave it in the trunk?
Maybe, if I was super attached.
Nice.
And I also try to think, what's it like to be on the other side of me? What's it like to be on the receiving end of that if I don't? Because when I would think of, with my daughter, my son, my husband, anybody, sometimes that was a really hard question for me to answer, or for me to look at. It's probably like no fun. What if it's lonely to be on the other side of me because I'm not talking much because I'm trying to not be mad in the situation? Does it feel like on the other side of me that it's really frustrating to be with me right now?
Yeah.
And that sort of tempers my ability to let it go.
It's a damn energy you bring into the room.
Yeah. Right. And I think one thing that's helped me too is to know that, that if something was repetitive, I learned as I went. And if something like running my kids to a sports practice at a certain time every day, if it was always really frustrating because it was in the middle of work or in the middle of something, I also thought, well, sometimes I could not do that. I mean, if it's really hard to switch, or it's really affecting the thing I'm leaving, maybe once or twice a week, I don't do that thing and someone else does, if that's an option. So I just would consider that I almost always had an option. So if I was going to commit to to do the thing, then I had to be responsible for what I brought to it.
I guess it's that provides a nice transition to the next question. You have a small chapter in the book. Actually, it's not small. Certainly important for me as I read through it. Balance is an energy sucking myth. Go.
Yeah, we hear so many things about work-life balance, and they really frustrate me, mostly because I feel like it doesn't work, the concept. I feel like that the work-life balance that we're meant to pursue, if we're trying to be good humans or adults or parents or whatever, is that, there should be enough time in the day, enough time in the week to work and be a parent and be a friend and take care of all your house and sleep and exercise and all the things. And somehow that the more you've sort of arrived in your life, so to speak, the more, balance that all has, and in a time frame. And like the night life is neatly divided into, 3 to 8 hour chunks or something every day. And I just feel like it's a lie. I don't think that's how life works. I think that life's messier than that and more fluid than that. And when we are trying to, at least I'll speak for myself, when I was working at the hospital, traveling for consulting, had young kids, I always just felt like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like I should always be somewhere else. And it left me mostly feeling guilty that I wasn't in this balance. And I would come home from a trip and think, I have to make up all this time with my kids, make up all this time with my family, or I better not do something because now, I've been away for X many hours, or I worked extra today, so I have to make it up, and vice versa, that I had to make up work hours on the other side of vacation, and just all the things in the pursuit of balance.
We had founder and president of a company called the Green Beaver 3 weeks ago. And he grew up in the country, and he mentioned balance. I didn't ask him about it. He mentioned balance, and he talked about a 3-way balance. But I'll get back to him in a second here, because I think the word. So I agree with you. That's why it was important for me to read that chapter. I live in a city. I grew up in a city. I both I get energized by the city and I get frustrated by the city. Just like the city is my teenager. So I get both by the city. But I don't feel both when I'm in the countryside. I feel more in tune when I'm in the, and I'm not a country boy, but I feel in tune. And I think we use the word balance. I think it comes from the wrong mindset, because we use the word balance as folks from a civilization that builds nature over with cement, asphalt, steel. But I think real balance really means grounding, because life, to your words, life is, it will always be messy, will always stay fluid. And we have to understand how to navigate it and move with it. And that's got nothing to do with what we call balance. I think it's misnamed. And so going back to Alain Menard, he grew up in the country. He's a country boy. Became a biochemist, worked for a pharmaceutical company, and then realized, there's something else I need to navigate here. And so he started this a natural personal care product company with his wife, who's a chemist. And he talks about things that make him grounded, like carving spoons. He built a cabin because he had cabin fever. Like, this is stuff that grounds him. He thinks it's balance. I have to have this talk with him again. I have to follow up with him again. So going back to babies.
Yes.
I think babies, they do ground you, because you need to have a good sense of yourself in order to take care of something that's got an energy you don't understand yet.
Yes. Yes. And they also demand that you be in the present moment.
Demand. Yes. Yes.
You can't ignore them. I mean, you could, but they will, they need constant care. And I think it's a huge challenge of having, a young baby, is just how demanding it is. But so much of that is the presence, the always needing you, always needing something. And they are a grounding force. I think they give us some perspective too, and get us out of our own, I don't know if the word selfishness, but sort of just our own sphere. When you're used to just taking care of your own self, or maybe you have, a spouse or significant other, but then if there's this little human there, it just throws your world into another sphere, because you have to think outside of yourself all the time.
Okay. So yes, when you have a baby enter your life, the first thing that becomes important for you is the network that you have. It's your family members. It almost always occurs that you start to understand, okay, who can I rely on to help me and support this? And that's something, I mean, in Western culture, but not just in Western culture, but I just say, because we live in it, we've lost connection with the importance of the tribe and how the tribe pitches in. And the tribe, they're not a bunch of visitors.
Right.
They upbring everybody together. That's what's a grounding force. I learned from Gabor Mate, who was on the podcast, and I had to look it up a few weeks ago, that there's a ministry of loneliness in the UK. It saddens me that occurs. It saddens me. Being alone and loneliness are two different things. Yes. But I find that we are both, and that they can't be separated today. and the importance of the self, because it trumps everything else in our modern society. We've lost connection with what that baby represents.
I think we've lost touch with the value of community in that way, and the baby being this sudden central force for new life in the community, new life in your family. And, we're more spread out. We're more individual on our devices. We're, kind of all in these little silos, even while we're connected by technology, but not as much by our being in person together and really doing that upbringing, that doing the community, the family, and whether they're your, family or your chosen family. I think we have lost some sense of that community, which is, I think, vital for not just us as adults and parents, but certainly the kiddos in our lives.
I don't know if this is going to end up sounding relevant, but I'll give you another example on this. The more we talk about this, the more I find that it's so dear to me, and the memories that I had as a young father, first-time father. My son was in that NICU, that second hospital that we went to. We were feeding him by test tube because he's still, you obviously know, but for the listeners, I just had small experience with it. You have to feed him through a test tube, which means it was connected to a tube. So you had the feed in the tube because you couldn't breastfeed. He was still too young. Mm-hmm. And that tube goes up, it's taped to the nose, but it goes up the nose and down the throat. That's how he ate. And you have to hold a test tube above the baby's face so that it runs through. That's how yes. I fed my son for 9 days. And it was just so weird. It felt like, I don't know. It felt like it was surreal. It was like I wasn't feeding a human being this way. But I was in this room. My wife was resting. I wanted to feed him. And I was in this room with another father. I didn't know him. He's about 10 years older than me. He had a TTC jacket on. TTC is the Transit Commission. So he's a bus driver or a subway driver. I don't know what it was. We didn't make eye contact. He was just already feeding his baby the same way. And we sat in this room feeding our babies. I felt connected to this guy. Yeah. I felt really connected to this guy, just feeding my baby. He's feeding his baby. We didn't even look at each other. I felt like, yeah, this feels right. We're taking care of things. There's that energy that was already in the room that I entered just made me, it grounded me. Like I guess there's no other word. It grounded me. I was in the present moment. Always remember looking at my son, feeling like, yeah, this is all that matters as I'm watching this test tube above your face. But because there was another father there. Anyway, I told you, I don't know whether it's relevant.
Well, that's actually interesting because there's a lot of research right now about how to design NICUs. And it went from being sort of big open football fields of design back in the day where there were baby, one after the other with not much privacy, lots of noise, et cetera, to then completely private rooms, which are, have a lot of advantages for the baby's development, but also they've discovered that sometimes then that separation, you don't see the other parents. You don't have that feeling you had because you're just in your own room. Mm-hmm. So there's pros and cons in the end. And sometimes the babies didn't hear enough language for their language to develop because they were alone instead of in the hub. So it's fascinating. There are all kinds of things we can do to make either of those environments conducive to development. But it's interesting to me, the separation of the parents from each other, because while privacy is fantastic, being isolated is not. And there's something to that feeling that you had, in my opinion, about feeling like you're not the only one going through this. And like you said, I'm doing something here. This is important. Yeah. There's nothing more important on the planet I could be doing right now than feeding my son this way. And that's the truth. Yeah.
That's the truth. And it was validated by experiencing somebody else do exactly the same thing at the same time. It was like we were family members at the same time, but not. It was wonderful. Thank you for that. We talked a little bit about creativity last time. You said you were the youngest of 5 kids by many years. And so you spent a lot of time as a kid by yourself because your siblings were all grown up, so to speak. So you spent a lot of time creating something out of nothing. What did that mean?
But yeah, there's a 6-year gap. The 4 of them are close together. And so they were all in school by the time I was born. And I felt like I spent a lot of time in those hours of my early childhood, trying to, I had a lot of time on my hands to be creative, to find out something to do. There weren't all the things there are now. So there wasn't really even TV on during the day that was kid appropriate or interesting. So I think the time gave me the space to create, and I would paint things, draw things. When I was old enough, write things. I spent a lot of time outside. I think being outside is a lost art for kids, a lost learning place in the world. But I loved taking something as silly, whether it was, being a little tiny kid and painting rocks I found, or doing bigger things that were more complex as I got older. I don't know if I would have had the opportunity to develop some of that love for creativity had I not had the time, had I not had the space that wasn't scheduled. It was unscheduled time. Whereas I felt like our kids even had so much more scheduled things, that you had to fight for the time where they just could be and just go outside and figure out something to do. And I think that really fed my creativity. And then, the house was busy and noisy and everything later when everybody was around, which I also loved. But I'm glad I had that time to figure out. I remember spending, my sister probably doesn't even know this story, but I remember spending hours trying to just copy my sister's signature.
Nice.
Just trying to copy how she wrote. She's 10 years older than me. And she's also left-handed, IDs. Which is tricky. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, exactly. Her fake ID someday. Yeah. But just things that were later endearing to me because you had the space.
I'm making the connection recently about having the alone time, having the time to just create something out of nothing, to becoming an adult, young adult or an adult who just is able to sit back and just get something done and do something that they haven't done before. And so I'll go to you. You said at the beginning of this conversation, more or less, that you knew something needed to be done. An association didn't exist. Framework, regulations, a way of training people to care for babies in your scene didn't exist. You weren't interested in being a leader in it. You didn't think you'd be a leader, but you knew that something needed to be done. So you created it. And I assume here, I'm making my own assumption, not to be a leader of something, but just to lead it so that others can just take it and go. I think that's what, that's a magic. I think that's the magical output of creativity, where you're leading by example and creating something for others then to take and go do and go create themselves.
It is. I did not create it to be the leader of anything. These were my colleagues, my friends. I felt like somebody just had to put everything in place so that we could all go about connecting and making our profession better and more specialized, and the outcomes of it better. And it takes all of us to make that magic. And I just had to step forward first. Somebody had to. And I realized over time that while I didn't see myself as a leader, I had a really clear vision, I realized eventually, for what this should look like. And, and I think to the creativity part, I was very much a perfectionist in previous times, but I think the creativity piece teaches you that you can create something, throw it away, create something, figure it out, iterate it, make it better. It doesn't have to be, I didn't have to figure out how to run this thing 30 years, what it had to look like. I just had to start it. And I could trust myself that I could figure some things out from there with help.
Yeah. So creating, and this is, I think, something we need to get out of our heads too, because we've been taught this about creating, right? It's not worth it unless it's successful. That's what we're taught. But creating is a process, it's a commitment and a process at the same time. That's all it is. It's not success of anything. That is the success.
Yes. Yes.
The success is that you're committing to creating. Like it's upside down the way we see creativity. Like we only celebrate creative folks if they've sold enough albums for us then to, put our hands together and applaud. Like that's bullshit. It's bullshit.
Right. It is. And I think the baby part of that, to me, the lesson for me and them was just that for myself was that they are always in development. I don't compare this baby to that baby to this baby. They're always in development. And yet at some point so our small babies, and then they're crawling and they're walking, they're developing. And we don't, at some part in our lives, we kind of, especially after childhood, think we're finished developing. And now we're just adults, I guess, and we should just have everything figured out, or we're finished. And the truth is we're just all in development forever. And when we get stuck on that, there's an arrival, there's a finish line, there's a place of ultimate success, I think we get caught in that cycle of then being let down after any type of even small success, because we thought, wow, I was all pure with my success and the trophies or the things or the awards or the degrees or whatever it is for you. But then that feeling doesn't last. And I don't think it's supposed to. I mean, it's just another piece of our development. And it's like, it feeds the next thing. It's useful because it feeds what you're going to do next, or
Wonderful.
it feeds something else. It's, and that's how development always works.
It's a constant. We are constant. We have to understand that we're constantly, I think that's why many of us get saddened and depressed at doing what we're doing, because we're not creating enough.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is relevant either. Last comment on this. I just read that I think it's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar sold his 3 or 4 or 5 championship rings recently for like, I don't know, $1.2 or $2.2 million to fund what's nearest and closest to him, which was, I think, is build schools for underprivileged kids. I thought that was wonderful. I mean, it's kind of sad that he needs to sell it, because the belief system by somebody else who has the money is strong enough for them to spend the money on objects. To him, those are objects are exactly what they are. They don't define him. What defines him is his eagerness to create. Yes,
and that feeling is, you can take that with you.
Yeah. Oh, well said, sister. Well said. Last question. Actually, before I ask the last question, you have a weakness that you mentioned in your book. I need to mention it here. I share in that weakness, the desire to go for a walk or eat crispy, salty potato chips. That's daily for me. That challenge daily.
I swear it's genetic. I think it's passed down strongly in my family.
It is an evil.
It is
necessary. Necessary. Potatoes are made for a reason. Yes. So last question. What is greatness to you?
Greatness to me is really showing up, loving the people that I love in the best way I know how, every day, without judgment, which is really the hard part. And I would say, really in line with this conversation, I think greatness is to be of good use in the world. I want my life to be useful for something outside of myself. And when I see other people using their gifts, like you are, your time, your talents, your efforts, to be of use for the world, that to me is greatness.
Making me emotional here. Sue, thank you. Thank you for taking the time as well. I appreciate what you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today, there's more to come. Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and learn about our live events at inspirenorth.com. You'll also find links to our social media right on our website, so be sure to give us a like and follow. Until next time, stay inspired.